The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the small wooden platform that passed for a station in Cedar Ridge, Montana. Dust swirled through the October air, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant snow. Clara Whitmore clutched her worn leather bag against her chest, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone within a mile could hear it. She was a widow at 23, a mail-order bride who had never met the man waiting for her. And she was more terrified than she had ever been in her entire life. The driver jumped down and yanked open the door. "Cedar Ridge, ma'am, end of the line." Clara's legs trembled as she stepped onto the wooden platform. The town stretched before her, a handful of buildings clinging to the mountainside like they were afraid of being swept away by the wind. A general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and beyond it all, mountains so tall they seemed to scrape the sky itself. She had left everything behind. Her home in Boston, the memories of her dead husband, the whispers of neighbors who blamed her for his death. She had come west seeking a fresh start, answering an advertisement for a bride that had promised nothing but a roof over her head and a man who needed a wife. What kind of man advertised for a bride in a newspaper? She had asked herself that question 100 times during the journey. A desperate one, a lonely one, or perhaps a dangerous one. Clara scanned the platform, searching for a face that matched the brief description in his letters. Tall, he had written, brown hair, works a ranch outside of town. His name was Elijah Stone, and beyond those sparse details, she knew nothing about him. The platform was nearly empty. An old man sat on a barrel, whittling a piece of wood. A woman hurried past with a basket of eggs. And then Clara's breath caught in her throat. A man emerged from the shadows of the general store, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. He was enormous, not just tall, but massive, the kind of man who looked like he could lift a horse with his bare hands. His shoulders were so broad they blocked out the sun, and his arms strained against the fabric of his worn flannel shirt. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, dark and untamed, and his eyes. His eyes found hers across the platform, and Clara felt something cold slide down her spine. He was walking toward her. She took an instinctive step backward, her heel catching on the edge of the platform. The world tilted, her bag slipping from her fingers, and she braced herself for the impact of hitting the ground. But the impact never came. Two enormous hands caught her, one around her waist, one gripping her arm. Clara found herself pressed against a chest that felt like a wall of solid muscle, her face inches from the buttons of a flannel shirt that smelled of pine and leather and something uniquely masculine. "Careful there." His voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder, but softer than she expected. "These platforms aren't built for fancy shoes." Clara looked up, way up, and found herself staring into eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. Amber and gold, with flecks of something darker around the edges. Up close, she could see that his face, while rugged and weathered, held a certain gentleness in the lines around his eyes, like a man who had spent a lot of time squinting into the sun, waiting for something that never came. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I was just scared." The word hung between them, simple and devastating in its accuracy. Clara swallowed hard. Are you Elijah Stone?" Something flickered in those amber eyes, something that looked almost like pain. "I am." He released her slowly, carefully, as if she were made of glass that might shatter at the slightest touch. Clara immediately felt the cold rush back in where his warmth had been. "You're Clara Whitmore," he said. It wasn't a question. "My bride." The word sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the October wind. "Yes." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm Clara." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara was acutely aware of how small she must look standing next to him. She was barely 5 feet tall, and this man had to be at least 6'5", maybe more. His hands, now hanging at his sides, were large enough to wrap around both of hers, with room to spare. He was the kind of man who could break a woman in half without even trying. The thought must have shown on her face, because something shifted in his expression. The hardness around his jaw softened, and he took a deliberate step backward, putting space between them. "I know what you're thinking," he said quietly. "Looking at me, wondering what kind of man you've agreed to marry, wondering if you made a terrible mistake coming here." Clara's heart lurched. She wanted to deny it, to insist she wasn't afraid, but the words wouldn't come. "I won't lie to you," Elijah continued. "I'm not a small man. I'm not a gentle-looking man. But I need you to know something, Clara Whitmore." He held her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I will never hurt you. Not ever. Not for any reason. You have my word on that. And my word is the only thing of value I've got left." There was something in his voice, a rawness that spoke of old wounds and older promises. Clara found herself believing him despite every instinct screaming at her to run. I believe you," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. A flicker of something, relief perhaps, crossed his face before he nodded once and bent to retrieve her fallen bag. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I've got a wagon waiting." He glanced at her dress, a practical grey wool that had already accumulated a layer of dust. "It's a rough road. You might want to hold on tight." Clara followed him around the corner of the general store, where a sturdy wagon waited with 2 massive draft horses stamping impatiently in the traces. Elijah set her bag in the back, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hands circled her waist again, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The strength in those hands was undeniable, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. He set her on the wooden seat like she was something precious, something fragile, and Clara felt her fear begin to crack around the edges. Elijah climbed up beside her, and the wagon groaned under his weight. He gathered the reins in those enormous hands and clicked his tongue, and the horses set off at a steady walk. The road wound through the valley, following a creek that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Mountains rose on either side, their peaks already dusted with snow. Clara had never seen anything like it after the crowded streets of Boston, the factories belching smoke, the endless grey. This felt like another world entirely. "It's beautiful," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Elijah glanced at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Most people coming from back east say it's desolate. Maybe they weren't looking at it right." The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, barely visible beneath his beard. Maybe not. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching over the rocky path. Clara found her gaze drifting to the man beside her, studying him in stolen glances. His profile was strong, almost harsh, with a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once and a jaw that could have been carved from granite. But there was a weariness in the set of his shoulders, a heaviness that seemed to have nothing to do with his physical size. "Your letters," she said finally, breaking the silence. "They were very brief. I'm not much for words on paper. But you wrote that you needed a wife. Why?" Elijah's hands tightened on the reins, his knuckles going white for just a moment before relaxing. "A man gets lonely out here. The winters are long and the nights are longer. I've got a good ranch, good land, but..." He paused, staring straight ahead at the road. A house isn't a home without someone to share it with. Clara thought about her own home back in Boston, the narrow townhouse she had shared with her husband for 3 miserable years. The way the walls had seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a marriage that had been a mistake from the very beginning. "My husband died 8 months ago," she heard herself say. "Consumption. It was a long illness. Elijah nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be." The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. "He wasn't a kind man. I won't pretend to mourn him more than I did." Something shifted in the air between them. Clara had expected judgment, had expected the shocked disapproval that everyone back in Boston had shown when she refused to wear black for the full year of mourning. Instead, Elijah simply nodded again, as if her honesty was the most natural thing in the world. "Then I'll say, I'm sorry for the years you spent with him," he said quietly. "And I'll promise you this. Whatever your marriage was before, this one will be different. You won't have to be afraid of me, Clara. Not ever." She studied his profile in the golden afternoon light, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of the cruelty she had learned to recognize in her first husband's eyes. But all she saw was a bone-deep tiredness and a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Why did you never marry before?" she asked. "A man with land and means. There must have been women in town who would have had you." Elijah's jaw tightened. "There were. But a man like me, most women take one look and see a monster. A beast, something to be feared, not loved." His voice was flat, carefully emotionless. "I stopped trying to convince them otherwise a long time ago." The words hit Clara harder than she expected. She thought of the way she had recoiled when she first saw him, the way her heart had hammered with fear. She was one of those women, she realized, one of the ones who had looked at him and seen only the threat, not the man. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be." He echoed her earlier words, his lips quirking slightly. "You're here, aren't you? That's more than most were willing to do." The wagon crested a small ridge, and suddenly the valley spread out before them in all its glory. And there, nestled at the base of the mountains, was the ranch. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful. A sprawling log house with a wide porch and windows that caught the setting sun. A massive barn painted the color of rust. Corrals fenced with split rails, where horses and cattle grazed peacefully. And beyond it all, acres upon acres of land stretching toward the mountains, untouched and wild and utterly magnificent. "This is yours," she whispered. "Ours," Elijah corrected quietly. "From the moment you said yes to my letter, this became yours too." Clara felt tears prick at the backs of her eyes, and she blinked them away furiously. She had expected a shack, a crude cabin, something barely fit for habitation. Instead, she found herself staring at a home, a real home, built with care and maintained with pride. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen," she said, her voice thick. Elijah looked at her, really looked at her, and for just a moment, she saw something raw and vulnerable in those amber eyes. Hope, maybe, or something even more fragile. "I built it myself," he said. "Took me 5 years. Logging trees in the winter and building in the summer. I always thought—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter what I thought. Tell me," Clara urged softly. He was quiet for a long moment, the wagon rolling slowly down the hill toward the house. "I thought maybe someday there'd be someone to share it with. Someone who would look at it and see what I saw. Not just walls and a roof, but a future. A family." His voice dropped so low she had to strain to hear it. A place to belong. Clara's heart ached with a tenderness she hadn't expected to feel. This enormous, intimidating man with his thunderous voice and hands that could crush stone. He was lonely. Desperately, achingly lonely. Just like her. "It's perfect," she said, and she meant it with everything she had. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Elijah jumped down before coming around to help Clara descend. Again, his hands were gentle around her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all and setting her down on the hard-packed earth with infinite care. "Welcome home," he said, the words rough-edged with emotion. Clara looked up at the house, at the smoke curling from the stone chimney and the light flickering in the windows. and she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked away for a very long time. She didn't know if she could ever love this man. She didn't even know if she could ever truly trust him. But standing here, in the shadow of mountains she had only ever dreamed of seeing, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, its mantel carved with intricate designs of horses and mountains. The furniture was simple but well made, heavy pieces that looked like they could withstand a century of use. A staircase led up to the second floor, and through a doorway, Clara could see a kitchen with a cast-iron stove and shelves lined with preserves. "I'll show you to your room," Elijah said, picking up her bag. "You'll want to rest after the journey." Clara followed him up the stairs, acutely aware of how small she felt in this house that seemed built for a giant. The hallway was wide, the ceilings high, and every doorway had extra inches of clearance. "I built it bigger than most," Elijah explained, catching her gaze. "Grew up in a house where I couldn't stand up straight in half the rooms. Swore I'd never live like that again." He stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall and pushed it open. Clara stepped inside and felt her breath catch. The bedroom was lovely. A large bed with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green. A wardrobe carved from dark wood. A window that looked out over the valley, now painted gold and pink by the setting sun. And on the nightstand, a vase of wildflowers, their petals bright against the fading light. "You picked flowers," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, his massive frame suddenly seeming awkward in the doorway. "Thought you might like them. Women usually like flowers. They're beautiful." She reached out and touched a delicate petal, marveling at its softness. "Thank you. My room is at the other end of the hall." Elijah's voice was carefully neutral. "I thought you might want space, time to get comfortable. I won't expect—" He cleared his throat, a flush creeping up his neck. "I won't expect anything from you, Clara, not until you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's all right too." Clara turned to look at him, this mountain of a man who was blushing like a schoolboy. He wouldn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder, and she realized with a start that he was terrified. Terrified of scaring her. Terrified of driving her away. "Elijah," she said softly. He flinched at the sound of his name on her lips, as if he wasn't used to hearing it spoken gently. "Thank you," she continued, "for everything. For the house, for the flowers, for being patient with me." His eyes finally met hers, and she saw a vulnerability there that made her heart constrict. "You came all this way to marry a stranger," he said roughly. "That takes more courage than I'll ever have. The least I can do is make sure you don't regret it." Before she could respond, he was gone, his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. Clara listened to them fade, then turned to look out the window at the last rays of sunset painting the mountains gold. She had come here expecting a monster. Instead, she had found a man who left flowers on her nightstand and promised never to hurt her. A man who had built a home with his own 2 hands and dreamed of filling it with a family. Maybe, she thought as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, maybe this wouldn't be such a terrible arrangement after all. She fell asleep with the wildflowers perfuming the air and the sound of the wind in the pines outside her window. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't dream of anything at all. The first week passed in a blur of new experiences. True to his word, Elijah showed Clara every inch of the ranch, from the high pastures where the cattle grazed to the spring-fed pond where the horses drank. He introduced her to his small crew of ranch hands, weathered men who tipped their hats respectfully and called her Mom. He taught her how to gather eggs from the chicken coop, how to check the horses' hooves for stones, how to tell when the weather was about to turn. Through it all, he was unfailingly patient. Never once did he raise his voice or show any sign of the temper Clara had learned to fear in her first marriage. When she made mistakes, he simply corrected them gently. When she asked questions, he answered them thoroughly. And every night he retired to his room at the end of the hall, leaving her alone with her books and her thoughts. It was strange. Good, but strange. Clara kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to reveal itself as a mask, hiding something darker. But the days passed, and the mask never slipped. On the 8th day, Clara woke to the sound of something crashing downstairs. She threw back the covers and ran for the stairs, her heart pounding with sudden fear. She found Elijah in the kitchen, clutching his left hand against his chest. Blood dripped between his fingers, staining his shirt crimson. "What happened?" Clara rushed to his side, her fear for herself forgotten in the face of his injury. "Knife slipped," he said through gritted teeth. "Stupid mistake. I was trying to cut some rope and wasn't paying attention." "Let me see." Clara reached for his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he let her take it. The cut was deep, a gash across his palm that was still bleeding freely. Clara felt her stomach lurch, but she forced herself to focus. "I need to clean this and bandage it. Do you have any supplies?" "Cabinet above the stove. There's a medical kit." Clara found the kit and set to work, gently cleaning the wound with water and soap before applying a salve that smelled of herbs and honey. Through it all, Elijah sat absolutely still, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I had a lot of practice." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. As she wrapped a clean bandage around his palm, her fingers brushing against his rough skin, Clara became acutely aware of how close they were. She could smell him, that pine and leather scent that she had begun to associate with safety. She could feel the heat radiating from his massive body, warming her even through the chill morning air. She tied off the bandage and looked up, intending to tell him to keep it clean and dry. But the words died on her lips. Elijah was looking at her like she was something precious, something miraculous. His amber eyes were soft, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "It was nothing." "No." His uninjured hand came up, hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. "It wasn't nothing. No one has—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "No one has taken care of me like that since my mother died. I'd forgotten what it felt like." Clara's heart ached. "How long ago?" 20 years, I was 14. "And your father?" Something dark flickered in Elijah's eyes. "Gone before that. Left when I was 8. Said I was too big, too strange. Said he couldn't stand to look at me anymore." Clara thought about the careful way Elijah moved, the way he seemed constantly aware of his size, the way he flinched whenever she showed surprise at his gentleness. She thought about a little boy who was too big, too strange, abandoned by his own father. "He was a fool," she said fiercely. Elijah blinked, surprised by her vehemence. Any man who could look at his own son and see something to be ashamed of. He was a fool, Elijah. A blind, stupid fool. For a long moment, Elijah simply stared at her. Then slowly, the corner of his mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "You're something else, Clara Whitmore," he said softly. "Clara Stone," she corrected before she could stop herself. "I'm your wife now, remember?" The smile widened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Clara Stone," he repeated, as if tasting the name on his tongue. I liked the sound of that. So did she, Clara realized with a jolt of surprise. She liked it very much. After that day, something shifted between them. The careful distance Elijah had maintained began to shrink, though he never pushed, never demanded. He simply let himself be present, let her see glimpses of the man beneath the intimidating exterior. She learned that he loved music, though he swore he couldn't carry a tune to save his life. She learned that he had a weakness for apple pie and would practically blush if she caught him eating the leftovers straight from the pan. She learned that he talked to the horses like they were old friends, and that he kept a worn photograph of his mother in a locket around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. And slowly, day by day, Clara felt her fear begin to fade. It was replaced by something else entirely: curiosity, warmth, and something deeper that she didn't dare examine too closely. 3 weeks after her arrival, the first snow came. Clara woke to a world transformed, the valley blanketed in white, the mountains glittering like something from a fairy tale. She stood at her window, transfixed by the beauty of it, until she heard Elijah's heavy footsteps in the hall. "Clara?" His voice was muffled through the door. "You awake?" "Yes." She opened the door to find him standing there, already dressed in heavy work clothes, snow melting in his dark hair. "I was watching the snow. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I need to check on the cattle in the upper pasture, make sure they're all accounted for before the storm hits." "Can I come?" The question surprised them both. Elijah's eyebrows rose, but after a moment he nodded. "If you're sure, it's rough going up there and it'll be cold." "I'm sure." An hour later, Clara was mounted on a gentle mare named Buttercup, following Elijah and his massive black stallion up a trail that wound through snow-covered pines. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the beauty of the landscape made it worthwhile. Elijah rode ahead, cutting a path through the deepening snow. Every few minutes he would glance back, checking on her, and each time Clara felt a little warmth bloom in her chest despite the cold. They found the cattle huddled together in a sheltered valley, their breath making clouds in the frigid air. Elijah rode among them, counting, checking for injuries, while Clara watched from the edge of the herd. "They're all here," he said finally, guiding his horse back to her side. "We should head back before the storm gets worse." But even as he spoke, the sky darkened overhead, and the wind picked up with a howl that made Clara's heart lurch. "Too late," Elijah muttered, looking up at the churning clouds. "We'll never make it back before it hits. There's a line shack about a mile from here. We'll have to wait it out there." The next half hour was a blur of swirling snow and biting wind. Clara could barely see 5 feet in front of her, relying entirely on Elijah's bulk ahead of her to guide the way. By the time they reached the small wooden cabin, she was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. Elijah half lifted her from the saddle, carrying her inside while she clung to his neck with numb fingers. The cabin was small and dark, but he had a fire going within minutes, the flames casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. "You're freezing," he said, his voice tight with worry. "We need to get you warm." He pulled blankets from a chest in the corner, wrapping them around her shoulders. But Clara couldn't stop shaking, her body refusing to generate heat. "It's not enough," she managed through chattering teeth. "I can't. I'm so cold." Elijah hesitated, his face torn with indecision. There's another way. Body heat. It's the fastest way to warm someone who's this cold. But I'd have to..." He swallowed hard. "I'd have to hold you. Close." Clara looked at him, this giant of a man with fear in his eyes. Fear of scaring her, fear of crossing a line, fear of being something she couldn't accept. "Yes," she said. He blinked. "Yes. Hold me, Elijah, please. I trust you." Something cracked in his expression, something raw and painful and desperately hopeful. Slowly, carefully, he sat down beside her and opened his arms. Clara didn't hesitate. She crawled into his lap, pressing herself against his chest, burying her face in the warmth of his neck. His arms came around her, engulfing her completely, and she felt like she was being wrapped in a furnace. "Better?" he asked, his voice a rumble she could feel against her cheek. "Better." They sat like that as the storm raged outside, the fire crackling in the small hearth, the wind howling against the walls. Slowly the shaking eased, and Clara felt warmth seeping back into her bones. "I'm sorry," Elijah murmured against her hair. "I should have checked the weather before we left. I put you in danger." "You saved me," Clara corrected. "Just like you've been saving me since I got here." "I haven't. You have." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her face inches from his. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You treated me with kindness when I expected cruelty. You—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "You made me feel safe. For the first time in years. Don't you dare apologize for any of that." Elijah's eyes searched hers, dark with emotion. "Clara, I was so scared when I got off that stagecoach," she continued, the words spilling out now that they had started. "I saw you and I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. You were so big, so intimidating. I was certain you would be just like him." Pain flickered across Elijah's face, but he didn't look away. "But you're nothing like him," Clara whispered. "You're gentle and patient and kind. You pick wildflowers for my nightstand and bake bread and read Homer by the fire. You're—" She stopped, her heart hammering. "You're the best man I've ever known." "Clara," his voice was hoarse, broken. "You don't have to say these things. I know." She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his cheek. The beard was softer than she had expected, and beneath it, his skin was warm. "I'm saying them because they're true." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starving for contact. I never let myself hope that you might what?" His eyes opened, and what she saw in them stole her breath. Hope and fear and something deeper, something that looked a lot like the feeling that had been growing in her own chest for weeks. "That you might ever see me as anything other than a monster." "You're not a monster," Clara said fiercely. "You never were. And anyone who made you think otherwise was wrong. Do you hear me, Elijah? They were wrong." A shudder ran through his massive frame, and Clara realized with a start that he was trembling. This enormous, powerful man was trembling in her arms, undone by a few kind words. "Can I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Can I tell you something? Anything. I fell in love with you the moment you stepped off that stagecoach." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for weeks. "You were so small, so frightened, and all I wanted to do was protect you, keep you safe, make you happy." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I knew it was hopeless. Knew you could never feel the same way, but I couldn't help it. I love you, Clara. I've loved you since the first moment I saw you." Clara's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Elijah, you don't have to say anything." He was talking quickly now, not meeting her eyes. "I know I'm not what you wanted, not what any woman would want. I just needed you to know, in case you decide to leave when spring comes. In case you—" Clara kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. She simply leaned up and pressed her lips to his, silencing the flood of self-deprecating words. For a moment, Elijah was frozen, his entire body rigid with shock. Then his arms tightened around her, and he kissed her back. It was nothing like the kisses she had known before. There was no cruelty in it, no demand, no taking. It was gentle and tentative and achingly sweet, the kiss of a man who had never expected to be kissed and couldn't quite believe it was happening. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Clara," Elijah whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. "What are you doing?" "I'm kissing my husband," she said, a little breathlessly. "Is that all right?" A laugh escaped him, rough and incredulous. "Is that all right? He shook his head, wonder in his eyes. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not." She smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "But you've got me anyway." They stayed in the line shack until the storm passed, wrapped in blankets and each other. They talked for hours, sharing secrets they had never told anyone, fears and hopes and dreams. Clara told him about the baby she had lost in the second year of her marriage, the one her husband had blamed her for. Elijah told her about the years of loneliness, the growing certainty that he would die alone in his beautiful house with no one to mourn him. They cried together and laughed together, and somewhere in between fell deeper in love than either had thought possible. When the storm finally broke and they rode home through the glittering snow, everything had changed. And nothing had changed. They were still two wounded people, still carrying scars from their pasts, but now they carried them together. That night, Elijah walked Clara to her bedroom door, as he had every night for the past 3 weeks. But this time, when she opened the door, she didn't go inside. "Stay with me," she said quietly. Elijah's breath caught. "Clara, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He took her face in his hands, those enormous hands that could crush stone, but held her like she was made of silk. "Don't be scared by my size," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll take it nice and slow. I promise." Clara reached up and covered his hands with her own. "I know you will. I trust you, Elijah, with my life, with my heart, with everything." They crossed the threshold together, closing the door softly behind them. The months that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. Winter wrapped the valley in white, confining them to the house for weeks at a time. But instead of feeling trapped, Clara felt cocooned, safe in a world of their own making. She read aloud to Elijah by the fire, their voices blending as they discussed philosophy and poetry. He taught her to play chess, though she suspected he let her win more often than not. They cooked together, laughed together, loved together, and slowly, both of them began to heal. Clara stopped flinching when Elijah raised his hand, stopped waiting for the blow that never came. The nightmares that had plagued her since her first husband's death faded, replaced by dreams of sunlit meadows and the sound of children's laughter. Elijah, too, began to change. The wariness in his eyes softened, the defensive hunch of his shoulders eased. He laughed more, smiled more, touched her freely, and often as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I never knew," he said one night, holding her close in their bed as the fire crackled low. "I never knew it could be like this." "Like what?" "Happy." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I never knew I could be happy." "Neither did I," Clara admitted. "But I am. For the first time in my life, I am." Spring came late to the mountains, but when it arrived, it came with a vengeance. The snow melted in rushing streams, the meadows erupted in wildflowers, and the world came alive with color and sound. And Clara discovered she was pregnant. She waited until she was sure, until the morning sickness had become undeniable, before telling Elijah. She found him in the barn, brushing down his stallion, and the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm going to have a baby." Elijah froze, the brush slipping from his fingers. He turned to face her slowly, his eyes wide with shock. "What?" "A baby, Elijah. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a child." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, without warning, he sank to his knees, right there in the hay and horse manure, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "A baby," he repeated, his voice muffled against her stomach. "We're having a baby. You're happy?" Clara's voice trembled with hope and fear. "You want this?" He looked up at her, and she saw tears glistening in his amber eyes. "Happy? Clara, I never let myself dream that." He stopped, shaking his head in wonder. "A family, a real family. I'm going to be a father." Clara sank down to join him, not caring about the dirt or the mess. She took his face in her hands, wiping away the tears with her thumbs. "You're going to be an amazing father," she said fiercely. "Do you hear me? You are going to be the father you never had. Our child is going to know what it means to be loved, to be protected, to be cherished. Because of you." Elijah pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said, the words fierce and broken. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Don't be scared," Clara whispered, echoing his words from so long ago. "We'll take it nice and slow, together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as summer turned to fall, Clara's belly grew round with their child. Elijah doted on her constantly, bringing her cool water when the heat became too much, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of long days, talking to the baby in a low rumble that never failed to make Clara smile. The townspeople, who had once looked at Elijah with fear and suspicion, began to change their tune. Word had spread that the giant rancher had married, that his mail-order bride had stayed, that they were expecting a child. One by one, the people of Cedar Ridge began to see what Clara had seen all along, the gentle heart hiding beneath the intimidating exterior. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid him now stopped to chat at the general store. Men who had whispered about him behind their hands now tipped their hats in respect. Even the sheriff, a grizzled old man who had clearly expected Clara to come running to him within the first week, began to nod at Elijah with something like approval. "They're warming up to you," Clara observed one afternoon, as they drove home from town with a wagon full of supplies. Elijah shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "They're warming up to you. I'm just the lucky fool who gets to be seen with you." "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Before you came, they looked at me like I was something to be feared, a wild animal that might turn on them at any moment. But now they see me through your eyes, and your eyes are very kind, Clara Stone." Clara leaned against his shoulder, watching the mountains turn gold in the late afternoon light. "Maybe I just see what was always there." The baby came early, on a night when the first snow of winter was beginning to fall. Clara woke to a sharp pain in her belly, and by the time she called for Elijah, she knew there was no time to fetch the doctor from town. The storm was already picking up, the wind howling outside the windows. "I'm scared," she admitted as another contraction gripped her. "Elijah, I'm so scared." He took her hand, his face pale but determined. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, we face it together." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort, and Elijah's steady voice guiding her through each wave. He had delivered calves and foals before, he told her. And while this was different, the principle was the same. Stay calm, breathe through the pain, trust your body to know what to do. And when the first light of dawn crept through the windows, a new cry filled the room. "It's a girl," Elijah said, his voice breaking. He lifted the squirming bundle into Clara's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled, and absolutely perfect. "A girl?" Clara whispered. "Oh, Elijah, she's beautiful. She has your nose." He touched the baby's cheek with one enormous finger, infinitely gentle. "And your eyes. God, Clara, she's so small. She'll grow. What if I hurt her? What if I'm too rough, too clumsy? What if—" "Elijah." Clara looked up at him, exhausted but fierce. "You will never hurt her, just like you've never hurt me. You are gentle and careful and loving, and our daughter is the luckiest girl in the world to have you as her father." He stared at her, then at the baby, then back at her again, and then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the first real smile she had ever seen him give, unguarded and brilliant. "Our daughter," he said, testing the words. "We have a daughter." "We do." Clara shifted the baby into his arms, watching as he cradled her against his massive chest with heartbreaking tenderness. "And she's going to need a name." They named her Rose, after Elijah's mother, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, all the challenges of life on the frontier. But through it all, Clara and Elijah faced each obstacle together, their love growing stronger with each passing season. Rose grew into a wild, fearless child who inherited her father's size and her mother's spirit. She could ride before she could walk, could rope a calf by the time she was 5, and could outshoot half the men in town by the time she was 10. She was the light of their lives, the proof that two broken people could build something beautiful together. And then came the others. A son they named Samuel, with his mother's gentle temperament and his father's amber eyes. Another daughter, Lily, who loved books as much as Clara and horses as much as Rose. And finally, a second son, Jacob, born when Clara was 32 and convinced she was done having children. The house that Elijah had built with his own hands, dreaming of a family he never dared hope for, was finally full. "Do you ever regret it?" Elijah asked one evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger?" Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her as naturally as breathing. "Not for a single moment. I was so afraid you would leave. Those first weeks, I kept waiting for you to tell me you'd made a mistake, that you couldn't bear to stay with a man like me." "A man like you?" Clara turned to look at him, her eyes soft. "You mean the man who built me a home with his own hands? Who picks wildflowers for my nightstand and reads to me by the fire? Who has never once raised his voice to me in anger, never once made me feel anything but cherished?" Elijah's arm tightened around her. "I mean the man who's too big, too rough, too—" She silenced him with a kiss, the same way she had silenced him in that line shack all those years ago. "You," she said when they finally broke apart, "are exactly the man I needed. The man I prayed for without even knowing it. Don't you dare call yourself too anything, Elijah Stone. You are perfect. For me, for our children, for this life we've built. Perfect." He rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her cheek. "I love you, Clara. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. You saved me, you know, saved me from a life of loneliness and fear. Made me into someone worth being. You were always worth being," Clara whispered. "I just helped you see it." In the meadow below, Rose was teaching Jacob how to catch fireflies, her voice carrying clear and bright on the evening air. Samuel and Lily were arguing about something near the barn, their words a comfortable blur of sibling rivalry. And above it all, the mountains stood sentinel, eternal and unchanging. "We have a good life," Elijah said quietly. "Better than I ever dreamed." Clara thought about the frightened young widow who had stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago, so certain she had made a terrible mistake. She thought about the journey that had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life that was richer and fuller than anything she had ever imagined. "Yes," she agreed, lacing her fingers through his. "We really do." The fireflies danced in the gathering dark, the children's laughter rang like bells, and two people who had once been broken found peace in each other's arms. It wasn't the life Clara had expected when she answered that advertisement in the newspaper. It was better, so much better. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer of thanks to whatever fate had brought her to this place, to this man, to this love that had healed them both. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of another winter, another season, another year of happiness. The giant cowboy and his frightened bride had found their happily ever after, and they were only just beginning. 20 years had passed since Clara Whitmore stepped off that stagecoach in Cedar Ridge, Montana. 20 years of love and laughter, of challenges met and obstacles overcome, of a family grown and a life well lived. She stood on the porch of the house Elijah had built, watching the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of gold and pink. Her hair, once dark as night, was now streaked with silver, and fine lines crinkled around her eyes when she smiled. But her heart was as full as it had ever been, perhaps even fuller. "Grandma!" A small voice called from the yard, and Clara smiled as a tiny figure came running toward her, dark curls bouncing with every step. "Grandma, watch what I can do!" Little Eleanor, Rose's oldest daughter, scrambled up the porch steps and executed a clumsy but enthusiastic curtsy. Clara clapped her hands in delight. "That's wonderful, darling. You're going to be the belle of every ball in Montana." "What's a belle?" "A very pretty lady who everyone wants to dance with." Eleanor considered this gravely. "Can I be a cowgirl belle?" "You can be anything you want to be." The screen door creaked open and Elijah emerged, moving a bit slower than he used to, but still impressively solid. His beard was entirely grey now, and he walked with a slight limp from a horse that had thrown him 3 winters ago, but his eyes were as warm as ever when they found Clara's. "There's my girls," he said, scooping Eleanor up with one arm while wrapping the other around Clara's waist. "What mischief are you plotting?" "Eleanor wants to be a cowgirl belle," Clara informed him. "Is that so?" Elijah lifted Eleanor high, making her squeal with delight. "Well then, you'll need to learn to ride and rope and shoot before you learn to curtsy, little one. Those are the important skills." "Can you teach me, Grandpa?" "I'll teach you everything I know, but first I believe your mama is calling you for supper." He set Eleanor down, and she raced off toward the smaller house that Rose and her husband had built on the north pasture. Clara watched her go, feeling that familiar ache of love and gratitude that never seemed to fade. "We made that," she said softly. "All of this. Together." Elijah's arm tightened around her. "We did." They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching their legacy unfold before them. Samuel was teaching his sons to brand cattle in the lower pasture, his patient voice carrying on the wind. Lily had married a lawyer from town and was expecting her first child in the spring. Jacob had just returned from college back east, full of ideas about new farming techniques that had Elijah shaking his head but listening intently. And Rose, beautiful, fierce Rose, who had inherited her father's size and her mother's determination, was raising her own family now, teaching her daughters the same lessons Clara and Elijah had taught her. That size doesn't determine gentleness. That love can heal the deepest wounds. That home isn't a place, but the people you choose to share your life with. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" Elijah asked quietly. Clara smiled. "I remember being terrified. You were the biggest man I'd ever seen, and I was convinced I'd made the worst mistake of my life. And now?" She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered cheek in her hand. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything, Elijah. A home, a family, a life worth living. You taught me what love really means." "You taught me," he corrected gently. "You saw past all the things that made other people afraid. You looked at a monster and saw a man. You were never a monster. You just needed someone to believe in you." He pressed his forehead to hers, the same gesture he'd been making for 20 years. "I love you, Clara Stone. More today than yesterday. More tomorrow than today. I love you too, my gentle giant, my home." They stood there as the last light faded and the first stars appeared. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of family. The children laughing, the cattle lowing, the wind rustling through the pines. It was a symphony of belonging, a chorus of home. Clara closed her eyes and breathed it all in, every sound, every scent, every moment of this improbable, impossible, absolutely perfect life. She had come west seeking escape from a painful past. Instead, She had found a future brighter than anything she could have imagined. And it had all started with a promise from a giant cowboy to a frightened widow. "Don't be scared by my size. I'll take it nice and slow." He had kept that promise. Every day, in every way, he had kept it. And Clara knew with absolute certainty that he would keep it for the rest of their days. The stars blazed overhead, eternal and unchanging, witness to a love story that would be told for generations to come. The story of the frightened widow and the gentle giant. The story of two broken hearts made whole. The story of home. In the kitchen, someone was lighting the lamps. In the barn, the horses were settling for the night. And on the porch of the house that love built, Clara and Elijah Stone watched the darkness gather, content in the knowledge that they had everything they had ever wanted and more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. The circle of life would continue to turn, bringing change and growth and eventually, inevitably, endings. But tonight, there was only this peace, this love, this certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Just as they always had, just as they always would. Clara smiled and leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her back. "Take me inside," she said softly. "It's getting cold." Elijah swept her up in his arms, as easily as he had that first day in the line shack, when the storm had raged and they had found warmth in each other. "Yes, ma'am," he said, that hint of a smile she loved so much tugging at his lips. "Whatever you want, for as long as I live." He carried her across the threshold into the warmth and light of their home, and the door closed softly behind them. Outside, the night was cold and dark and full of winter's promise. But inside, there was only love. And that was more than enough. It was everything. The following spring brought changes none of them could have anticipated. It started with a letter. Clara was sorting through the mail that had accumulated during a trip to town when she found it. A cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. Her sister, Margaret, the same sister who had refused to attend her wedding to Elijah, who had called her a fool for going west, who had predicted she would return within the year, broken and begging for help. Clara's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. "My dearest Clara," the letter began. "I know it has been many years since we have spoken, and I know the fault for that silence lies squarely with me. I was wrong. Wrong about everything. I have heard stories, even here in Boston, about the life you have built, about the family you have raised, about the man you married. I am dying, Clara. The doctors say I have only a few months left. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I find myself desperate to see you one last time. To tell you in person how sorry I am. To meet the husband I refused to acknowledge and the children I pretended did not exist. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, please come. Please let me make amends before it is too late." Your sister, Margaret Clara, read the letter 3 times before she could fully comprehend its contents. Margaret dying. Margaret apologizing. It seemed impossible, a fantasy conjured by the same woman who had told Clara she was making the biggest mistake of her life by leaving Boston. "Clara!" Elijah's voice came from the doorway, and she looked up to find him watching her with concerned eyes. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have." She held out the letter. "It's from my sister. She's dying, Elijah, and she wants to see me." Elijah took the letter, reading it slowly and carefully. When he finished, he looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to go?" Clara considered the question. Margaret had been cruel. She had said unforgivable things, had cut Clara out of her life completely when she chose to marry a stranger and move west. But she was also the only family Clara had left, the girl she had played with as a child, the sister she had once loved more than anyone in the world. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks it's too late for apologies." "Maybe it is." Elijah set the letter down and took her hands in his. "But I think you'll regret it if you don't go. Not for her sake, but for yours. You've spent 20 years carrying the weight of that broken relationship. Maybe it's time to set it down." Clara looked up at him, this man who knew her better than she knew herself. "You would come with me, all the way to Boston?" "I'd follow you to the ends of the earth, Clara Stone." "You should know that by now," she laughed, the sound watery with unshed tears. "It won't be easy. Boston society, they're not kind to men like you." "Men like me?" His lips quirked in that familiar half-smile. "You mean giants who married above their station?" "I mean wonderful, loving husbands who happen to intimidate small-minded people. I've survived worse than small-minded people." He pulled her into his arms, and Clara leaned into his warmth. "We'll go together. And if anyone dares say a word against you, they'll have me to answer to." 3 weeks later, Clara and Elijah found themselves in the parlor of Margaret's townhouse, surrounded by the kind of elaborate decoration that Clara had almost forgotten existed. Crystal chandeliers, silk wallpaper, furniture so delicate it looked like it would collapse under Elijah's weight. He stood by the window, looking spectacularly out of place in his best suit, which was still more practical than fashionable. But he held his head high, and when Margaret's butler had tried to look down his nose at him, Elijah had simply smiled and said, "Nice house. Bit small, though." Clara had to suppress a laugh at the man's expression. Now they waited, listening to the ticking of an ornate clock and the distant sounds of the city outside. Clara's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The door opened, and a nurse appeared, pushing a wheeled chair. And in that chair, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the room, was Margaret. Clara barely recognized her. The beautiful, vibrant woman who had ruled Boston society with an iron will was gone, replaced by a frail shell with hollow cheeks and paper-thin skin. But her eyes, bright and sharp as ever, found Clara's immediately. "You came," Margaret whispered. "I didn't think you would." Clara rose, crossing the room to kneel beside her sister's chair. "Of course I came. You're my sister." "A sister who treated you abominably," Margaret's voice cracked. "A sister who was too proud and too stupid to see what was right in front of her face." "Margaret, no. Let me say this. I've been practicing for weeks, and I'll lose my nerve if I don't get it out." Margaret took a shaky breath. "I was jealous, Clara, so terribly jealous. You had the courage to leave, to start over, to build a new life. And I was stuck here, married to a man I didn't love, playing the part of the perfect society wife. I couldn't bear to see you happy when I was so miserable." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Margaret, I had no idea. How could you? I never told you. I was too busy judging you, too busy pretending that my life was better than yours." Margaret's gaze drifted past Clara to where Elijah stood by the window. "Is that him? Your husband?" Clara turned, holding out her hand. Elijah crossed the room and took it, coming to stand beside her. Margaret studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, his size, his weathered face, the gentle way he held Clara's hand. "They said you were enormous," she said finally. "They didn't mention you were handsome." Elijah blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Mom, Margaret, please. Mom makes me feel even older than this wretched illness." She reached out a trembling hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Elijah took it. "I was terrible to your wife, Elijah. I said unforgivable things about her choice to marry you. I was wrong. Looking at you now, looking at the way you hold her hand, I can see that she chose well. She chose to give me a chance," Elijah said quietly. "Everything good in my life came from that." Margaret smiled, a genuine smile that reminded Clara of the girl she had once known. "Take care of her. Promise me." "I've been doing that for 20 years, Mom. I don't plan to stop now." They stayed in Boston for 2 weeks, visiting Margaret every day. As the days passed, Clara found the old wounds beginning to heal. They talked about their childhood, about their parents, about all the years they had missed. Margaret cried when Clara showed her photographs of the grandchildren she would never meet. Clara cried when Margaret admitted she had never stopped loving her, had never stopped regretting the words spoken in anger so long ago. On the last day, Margaret pressed a small velvet box into Clara's hands. "This was Mother's," she said. "The sapphire ring she always wore. I want you to have it, to give to one of your granddaughters someday." "Margaret, I can't." "You can and you will." Margaret's voice held a ghost of its old authority. "Consider it my apology, made tangible. Something beautiful to remember me by, instead of all the ugly things I said." Clara clasped the box to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I forgive you, Margaret. I forgave you years ago. I know you did. That's what makes you so much better than me." Margaret reached up and touched Clara's cheek with a trembling hand. "Now go home, little sister. Go back to those mountains and that beautiful family, and live the rest of your life as fully as you've lived the first half." "I will," Clara promised. "I love you, Margaret. I love you too. I always did. I was just too foolish to show it." Margaret died 3 weeks after they returned to Montana. The telegram arrived on a crisp autumn morning, and Clara read it on the porch, where she and Elijah had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. She didn't cry. Not at first. The grief was too big, too complicated, tangled up with all the years of hurt and the brief, precious weeks of reconciliation. Elijah found her there an hour later, still staring at the telegram with dry eyes. "Clara?" "She's gone," Clara said, her voice strangely calm. "Margaret. She died in her sleep." Elijah sat down beside her and pulled her into his arms without a word. And finally, wrapped in his warmth and safety, Clara let herself grieve. She wept for the sister she had lost twice, first to pride and then to death. She wept for the years they had wasted, the words left unsaid, the relationship that could never be fully repaired. And when the tears finally stopped, Elijah was still there, holding her close, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. "I'm glad we went," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "I'm glad I got to say goodbye." "So am I." "She gave me our mother's ring to pass down to one of the grandchildren." Elijah pulled back just enough to look at her face. "That was kind of her." "She was kind, underneath all the pride and pretension. I'd forgotten that." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want to forget again. I don't want to let anger and hurt keep me from the people I love. Life is too short, Elijah, too precious." "You're the least forgetful person I know," he said gently, "and the most loving. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you." Clara smiled despite her grief. "One of the reasons? There's a whole list. Want me to recite it?" "Maybe later." She leaned against him, feeling the weight of sorrow begin to ease. "For now, I just want to sit here with you." "For as long as you want," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." They sat together on the porch as the sun climbed higher and the ranch came alive around them. The sounds of cattle and horses, of children laughing and workers calling to each other, of life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Clara thought about her sister, about the choices they had both made and the paths they had both walked. Margaret had stayed in Boston, had lived the life she was supposed to live, and had died, full of regrets. Clara had taken a chance on a stranger, had traveled to the ends of the earth, and had found more happiness than she ever dreamed possible. She thought about the frightened young widow who had stepped off that stagecoach 20 years ago, so certain she was making a terrible mistake. What would that girl think if she could see herself now, a grandmother, surrounded by children and grandchildren, married to a man who loved her with every fiber of his being. She would think it was impossible, Clara decided. A fairy tale too good to be true. But it wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, every moment of it, from the terror of those first days to the joy of watching her family grow, was real. And that made it all the more precious. "Elijah," she said softly. "Thank you." He looked down at her, confusion creasing his brow. "For what?" "For everything. For being patient with me when I was scared. For giving me a home when I had nowhere to go. For loving me when I didn't know how to let myself be loved." She reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines that 20 years of sun and wind and laughter had carved into his skin. "For keeping every promise you ever made." His eyes softened, and he turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I promised I would never hurt you," he said quietly, "that I would take things nice and slow, that I would do right by you, whatever that meant. And you have, every single day. I'll keep those promises for the rest of my life, Clara. For as long as I draw breath, you're my home, my heart. Everything I am belongs to you." Clara smiled, feeling the last of her grief give way to something brighter. Love, gratitude, a bone-deep contentment that came from knowing exactly where she belonged. "Let's go inside," she said. "The children will be here soon for Sunday dinner, and I need to start the roast." Elijah stood and helped her to her feet, and together they walked into the house that love had built. Behind them, the mountains stood sentinel, timeless and unchanging. Before them, another day stretched out full of small joys and ordinary miracles. It wasn't the life Clara had planned. It wasn't the life anyone had expected her to have. It was better. And as she stood in her kitchen, watching her husband sneak a piece of bread before dinner, listening to the distant sounds of grandchildren playing in the yard, Clara Whitmore Stone knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. The word meant something different now than it had 20 years ago. It wasn't a place or a building or an address on an envelope. It was this man, this family, this love that had started with a promise and grown into something miraculous. Home was Elijah's arms around her as they watched the sunset. Home was Rose's laughter and Samuel's quiet wisdom and Lily's gentle spirit and Jacob's boundless energy. Home was grandchildren tumbling through the door, hungry for cookies and stories and the kind of unconditional love that only grandparents can give. Home was a giant cowboy who had looked at a frightened widow and seen someone worth loving. Home was having the courage to believe him. And home, Clara had finally learned, was something you built together, one day at a time, out of promises kept and fears conquered and love that never wavered. The sun continued to shine, the mountains continued to rise, and in a log house in the Montana wilderness, two people who had once been broken found wholeness in each other. Their story wasn't over. It would never truly be over, not as long as their children remembered it, not as long as their grandchildren passed it down, not as long as someone somewhere looked at an unlikely pair and thought, maybe this could work. Maybe love really does conquer fear. But for now, in this moment, it was enough, more than enough. It was perfect. And they lived, as all the best stories promise, happily ever after.